Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for A Matter of Time, which is episode 9 of season 5 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 5th season episode of Next Generation, A Matter of Time. So A Matter of Time is the episode where the Enterprise is en route to a mission and they discover a scientist from the future who comes in this time ship from the future, and he asks the crew to fill out questionnaires and starts acting extremely annoying. Troy doesn't trust him, Worf doesn't like him, but Crusher warms up to him a little bit. And Data sort of talks to him a lot, and they go to a mission on the planet where there was a I think an asteroid or something, I don't even remember, and it caused the weather to get really cold, and so the Enterprise is trying to create a greenhouse effect in order to warm up the planet, but their attempts by firing on the planet heat the planet up too much, and they cause a lot of volcanoes, and the volcanoes spit ash into the air, which exasperates their problem. And so Geordi comes up with a solution to save the planet. However, it has a chance of failing, and if it fails, everyone on the planet will die. However, if they do nothing and they don't enact a plan, then thousands will definitely die. And Picard asks Rasputin, the scientist from the future, to tell him what happened, but Rasputin refuses to do it, so Picard goes ahead with the plan anyway, which is successful, and they save the planet. Then Rasputin goes to return to his proper time. However, the Enterprise crew intercept him and refuse to let him return on the ship because they think that he stole a bunch of their equipment. So he allows Data to go on board, and he reveals to Data that he's not actually from the 26th century, that the ship is, however, he is from the 22nd century where he stole the time ship, and he stole all those devices in order to take him back to the 22nd century where he would become an inventor. And so Data realizes this. They were aware of this, and they deactivated all of the equipment. So when Rasputin tries to phaser Data, it doesn't work. And Data has a badass line about he's sure that his hand will operate the door of whether or not he's conscious or not. And so they take him out of the ship, and the ship disappears, goes back to the time, so Rasputin is now stuck in the 24th century, where he is being sent to a Federation penal colony, no doubt. So, this is part 3 of 3 in the Matter trilogy. You have A Matter of Honor, A Matter of Perspective, and then this episode, A Matter of Time. Now, do these episodes have anything in common other than the word matter? Well, that doesn't really matter. Anyway, I said that joke before in Matter of Perspective, but I had to be consistent and say it here because this is the next one in the Matter trilogy. It just shows that they were a bit unoriginal with their titles. Anyway, there's very mixed reviews on this one. Some people like it, some people hate it. I don't know if anyone loved it, but some people thought, oh, it was okay. It was fairly decent. Other people thought it was a complete and utter shit. Me personally, this has been kind of a nothing episode. And what I mean by that is it's not bad enough for me to remember it for being terrible and oh my god, I need to avoid this, it sucks. But it's also not good enough for me to be like, oh yeah, this is a decent episode or a good episode. This is something I want to watch. It's kind of forgettable. It's one of those, I guess you would call it popcorn episodes where you can just turn off your brain, sit there and eat popcorn and laugh at the funny jokes of the weird way that the professor is behaving. And so I never really thought of it that much, really. It was just kind of, and this was one of the first episodes I saw when it first aired. as I talked about before, it was a few episodes ago when I first started watching it. So this is when I first started getting into TNG. And I think I enjoyed this episode at the time because it was I think it was maybe the first time related episode that I saw. So, the major thing about this episode that anyone will tell you, and I think I only learned about this recently, unless I knew about it before and I just totally forgot, but this script was originally written for Robin Williams to star in this episode. I remember reading an article saying, oh, Robin Williams is going to star in an episode of TNG. And I kept waiting for that to happen, and it never did. In fact, I think I read that article around the time this episode came out, so the article was either old or wrong. but anyway, so yeah, Robin Williams is a huge Star Trek fan, and he expressed interest in being in Star Trek. In fact, arranged to be in an episode of Next Generation. So Rick Berman, yay, Rick Berman went out of the way to write an episode specifically tailored to Robin Williams. Now, Michael Piller talked about how he said it in a very polite way. He was like, oh yeah, there was a lot of work we had to do on this script to get it going, which is the polite way of saying that Rick Berman sucks as a writer, and they had to step in and sort of shape it up and make it a usable script. So obviously, Robin Williams didn't end up doing it. What, by all accounts, or the most reliable accounts, is that he had arranged to do it and was scheduled to do it, but he had just finished filming the movie Hook, and his wife was 8.5 months pregnant, and he got hired for another job, so he wanted to spend the time with his wife before he had to go and do the next job, so he backed out. So instead, they got Matt Fewer. Now, Matt Fewer, or is it Fewer? Fewer, the higher the fewer. Fewer, is it? I don't know. But anyway, he's a decent enough replacement. I mean, he's no Robin Williams, but he's a fairly good actor. He's good in his comedic timing. Of course, he's most well known for playing Max Headroom, and I've seen him in a bunch of various other things. In fact, I never watched the Max Headroom show. I remember seeing the Coke commercials. I think the Max Headroom show was like this weird futuristic dystopian thing that Max Headroom actually barely appeared in. But yeah, that was weird. He was just this guy who would like stutter a lot and have like he was always buffering, I guess. But anyway, I'm trying to think of what else I know him from. I know I've seen him in a lot of stuff, and every time I did, I'm like, hey, it's Max Headroom. I remember he played, one of the things I remember him most from other than Max Headroom is him playing the crazy guy in the Stand miniseries that came out in the early 90s. He played I can't even remember the dude's name, but he was like schizophrenic and hearing voices, and he rode like a dude buggy, and he loved to like blow shit up, and he ended up blowing up the nuclear bomb at the end of the spoilers, but anyway, at the end of the miniseries. But yeah, what the fuck was that guy's name? It was something like Tweaker or Boomer or I can't remember. Anyway, so and I thought he was good in that role. So I think he's a decent enough actor, but he is not by any means like an A-lister and nowhere near approaching the level of Robin Williams. He's more of a character actor who guest stars in, shows and movies and stuff. Maybe a bit above most the kind of actors that Star Trek normally gets, because I do remember being like, because I was unaware of the Robin Williams thing when this episode first came out, but I remember being like, oh, they got Max Headroom, so it was a bit of a step up, but nowhere near of a step up as Robin Williams would have been. And he did a decent enough job. That being said, if Robin Williams was in this episode, I am absolutely certain that this episode would have been like 100% better. like I really think I wouldn't be thinking, oh yeah, this is that throwaway episode with Max Headroom, that's okay. I would be thinking, holy shit, this is that awesome episode where Robin Williams came in. Now, I've heard the argument that they thought the script was so terrible that it couldn't be saved by Robin Williams. And first of all, as I said, I disagree with it being so terrible. I don't think the script is all that bad. But it's not all that great either. But I don't think it's bad enough to the point where Robin Williams couldn't save it. Because Robin Williams is a really good actor. And he's really good at improvising. He's really good at... I could just imagine him, like... I heard someone say if Robin Williams did this episode that he dodged a bullet by not doing it. And that if he did it, it would have been a blemish on his record, which I think is nonsense, because not every movie he's in is all that great. I gotta tell you. Toys, does anyone remember that? No, they don't, and there's a reason for that. But anyway, all I remember for this the ad campaign. They were like promoting the shit out of that movie, and I went and saw it. I was like, that sucked. But or Bicentennial Man, that movie was actually decent, but no one remembers it. But anyway, and there's even lesser movies that I couldn't call at my top of my head because they're that forgettable. But anyway, point is, I think that this would have been a much better episode. Maybe it wouldn't be amazing, top notch. I'm not going to put it in my top 10 or anything. But I still think it would be way better than it is. And that's nothing against Matt Fuhr. Like, he's a decent actor. Like, if they got a lesser actor, this episode would have flat out sucked. And I think a lot of what makes it decent is his acting. But, that being said, Robin Williams, way better. He would have been able to elevate this so much more, and I think he would have given notes, and since he's Robin Williams, they would have taken him seriously and accepted his notes, which usually Star Trek The Next Generation never does. It's like you have to say everything word perfect. Like if you just say a synonym for a word that means the same thing, the script supervisor would come in and be like, no, you said arrive when you were supposed to say whatever. I'm trying to think of an example, but you know what I mean. They were strict as hell, but I have no doubt if Robin Williams was there, they wouldn't do that to him. Especially since he's known for improvising, and that they would let him sort of spruce it up. And so I think he would have made the episode a lot better. But that is just my speculation, but it's my educated speculation based on what he can do. So, some people had huge issues with the time travel in this episode. I don't. There are some flaws, but it's kind of such a silly episode. I don't really care about it that much. Like, it's just like, yeah, it's just a dumb episode. Certainly not as flawed as Little Green Men, yet so many people seem to look past the flaws in that episode. I guess they find it funny, which I don't. But anyway, I'll get there when I get there. Yeah, so he comes from the future, and he's like, oh, you're standing in my spot. And he, like, comes aboard the ship, and he seems to know every detail, and being like, oh, is that where you always said it? But here's, like, so I don't have any issue with the time nonsense of it. It was a time-traveling historian from the 26th century, went to the 22nd century, found this guy in New Jersey. He did something to him undisclaimed by this episode, and then stole his ship, and then took it and went to the 24th century to try to steal more technology, and he got caught by Worf and Data and Deanna Troi and Picard. It never said who specifically figured this out. But anyway, they caught him and prevented him from going back, so now he's stuck in the 24th century. It's pretty straightforward. Like, I don't have an issue with that. There were much, much worse time travel logic in Star Trek. Past tense. Excuse me. So this is like, yeah, I don't really have an issue with this at all. But there is a flaw, and someone else pointed this out. If he had a time ship that was like a time ship with futuristic technology, why would he travel 200 years in the future just to steal some trinkets? I mean, you think that he would have to learn how to use the time ship, and he seemed to know all the technology. So after going through all that, like, he's just gonna worry about stealing like a couple tricorders and inventing them. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a very good plan. Is all I'm saying. It's kind of plot convenience for the episode. And also the other thing people point out is all someone would need to do, like someone on the Enterprise crew, all they need to do is ask them a question about the 24th century, not about the future, being like, oh, you understand this and you understand that. And like, for example, it's like, oh, you understand that the Klingon Empire and the Cardassian Empires are an alliance that challenged the Federation, and they're at war with us right now. And he'd be like, oh, yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah, the war is terrible. And be like, gotcha! They're not in an alliance, they actually don't like each other, and the Klingons are our allies. Ha! Like, they could have done something like that. And, you know, to be fair, maybe they just didn't think to challenge him. However, Troy, which I'll talk a lot more about Troy when we get to the Patreon comments, because a lot of Patreon comments talked about her, so I'll save my commentary on the strength of her empathic powers for that. But regardless, Troy didn't trust him. She made that flat out clear. And Worf didn't trust him. And so why didn't they challenge him like that? Seemed like it would have been a smart thing to do. But the Worf thing, I gotta admit, was funny. The way he was just like, I hate questionnaires. And every time they brought up the questionnaires, he'd be like, and that time when they're like sitting in 10 forward and I call him Matt Fuhrer, but what was it, Rasmussen or whatever? He was like, oh, there's our primitive mind. He was a warrior, hunter. How delightfully primitive. And just the look on Worf's face was like, oh my God, what the fuck, this fucking idiot. It was good comedy, actually. It was a good comic time. And I think, and again, getting back to Matt Fuhrer, I think he had really good comedic timing. And so I do think he is a decent comedian, a decent actor. Rob Williams would have been better, but, you know, can't always compare anyone to the best. I was watching a review where they said that Matt Fuhrer actually had a kind of Jim Carrey quality to him. And I could see that maybe a little bit, but Jim Carrey would have been way better in this role too. And, you know, Jim Carrey, you might be thinking he would be like over the top and be like, oh, I'm from the future. But he can tone it down. You see the Truman Show? He can tone it down when it's necessary. So I think he would have had like the nice little mix of it. But anyway, Jim Carrey wasn't really a thing when this episode came out. I don't even know if he was in living color at this stage. He might have been, but he definitely wasn't a big movie star. But for all the more reason they could have gotten him. But anyway, sorry. No, they didn't go for Jim Carrey. They went for Matt Fuhrer. But anyway, yeah, so most of those flaws, I'm just like, yeah. I mean, because the episode's not really that serious. But this is, in my opinion, another classic case of the A-plot, B-plot dilemma, where there is, in fact, this is the first one of season 5. First of many, which I'll be talking about a lot. So I want to keep count, okay? So this is one. And we'll get to it, where there's not A-plot, B-plot, because there's plenty of Star Trek episodes to do that, but I'm specifically referring to the A-plot being a character story that's usually boring. This one isn't boring, I will give it that. And a B-plot is just some throwaway anomaly bullshit that nobody fucking cares about. Now, granted, this isn't the strongest example of that because the A-plot and B-plot kind of tie in together a little bit, and that the B-plot isn't all that boring, but it mostly is. It's just a throwaway. Like, I couldn't even remember what the fuck was wrong with the planet. And in fact, it took me forever to figure out what the hell they were doing because my mind kind of just went blank whenever they went to this plot, because who the fuck cares? And that's I think maybe the biggest flaw in this episode is that Rasputin's going around being like, oh, you're just talking about the mission like it's the most important thing ever. He's like, remember, you'll be able to tell your grandkids you were there at whatever the fuck the name of this planet is, Panthera 4, yeah, whatever. And no, they're not, because no one gives a shit. It's just another throwaway bullshit mission where they go to some colony to try to save it and blah, 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 blah. And so, yeah, so even though this isn't one of the worst examples of that A-plot, B-plot nonsense, it is an example. So this is one. So stay tuned as I cover Season 5. I'll count down all the terrible ones and we see how many we come up with. Because Season 5, I think, is the worst season for this of TNG. Voyager will fucking do this a lot too, which will be nonsense. But I think Season 5 is the worst offender out of TNG. There was like only 2 or 3 in Season 4. And Season 4 was, I believe, the first, at least in my opinion, the first season that actually did this. I don't think Seasons 1 through 3, even though they had some episodes, A-plot, B-plot, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking specifically about the B-plot being a throwaway and bullshit that we don't give any shit about, and the writers don't give any shit about, and it's just there to make a threat, and it has nothing to do with anything. But anyway, you know, this episode does have a little bit to do with the main plot, but not enough for me to not count it. So let's talk about that, because there's the scene where Picard calls Rasputin into the ready room to help him, like, tell him what happened in the future. And this is a good scene. This is easily the best scene in the episode. And when I did my top 10 favorite Picard speeches, this was on there as a good Picard speech. I just love Patrick Stewart's performance. I think it is the standout in this episode, and it's what really made me remember the episode, how he sort of grills Rasputin on this, and he does like a very good job. And I said this in my speeches video, and I totally stand by that, is that if Rasputin actually did know what happened, because he doesn't know because he's actually from the past, but if he was actually from the future and he did actually know, he would have spilled his guts, because Picard's speech was so fucking amazing, which is why at the end he's just like very meekly was like, I can't help you, I'm sorry, because he's actually being honest in that case, because he can't help him because he doesn't fucking know. If he did know, he would have spilled his fucking guts, because Picard's speech so amazing. And this one I just loved, like I would recite the speech on my speeches video, and I loved like reciting this one where he was like, living is making choices. And sometimes I would violate the Prime Directive, even though it's Starfleet's General Order number 1, because I thought it was the right thing to do. And isn't this one the case where you might want to consider breaking that directive because it's the right thing to do? Like, I don't know. I've totally bungled that quote, but you get the point. It was really awesome. It was a really good speech. Yeah, and it was a really good acting. But it's also a really interesting dilemma of and the way that Matt Fury like states it like outright was really like good. That he just points it out. It's like do nothing and what does he say? No, do something and thousands could die. Do nothing and millions will die. which is, as story as that stupid B-plot is, and it's usually boring, that is an interesting dilemma. And then, of course, we get the thought experiment where Matt Fuhr, I keep calling him Matt Fuhr instead of Rasmussen because that's how I think of him. But anyway, he was, when he was making a case as to why he wouldn't do it, he's like, if I tell you that the planet, that you do your thing and everyone lives, then that's perfectly fine and you'll go ahead and do it, no harm. But if I tell you that if you did your thing and everyone died, then, well, you're not going to do your thing and just let thousands die, or whatever. No, that's not what he said. What did he say? Yeah, that's what he said. Like, so in his timeline, everyone died, but Picard's not going to do this thing, and so not everyone's going to die. And he's like, what if one of those people who were supposed to die grows up and Picard interrupts him? It's like, yes, I know. What if he grows up to be the next Hitler or Khan Singh? Khan reference, there we go. This was back in the time before they fucking killed this reference to fucking death in modern track. I'm sorry, I will not give Strange New Worlds a pass. Oh, this is Khan, he's the kid in a different timeline, he's in the fuck that shit. But anyway, sorry. Going on a different tangent there. Anyway, so that was an interesting thought experiment. That was the whole philosophical rules of time travel and how it would work. But you know what the thing is, and I was thinking about this, if I were Picard, and it's a good thing I'm not Picard, but the fact that Matt Fuhr said that hypothetical scenario and then refused to tell me the outcome, that would lead me to believe that my plan failed. Because he just said, well, if, I told you your plan worked and everyone lived, then you'll go ahead and do it and then no problem. So that makes me think if that was the case, he would have told me that. He would be like, oh yeah, don't worry, Picard, do your plan, everyone lives, it's all good. Because he's not changing anything. But if he told him, well, you killed everyone, then he's going to change. Picard's going to change his position and not do the same thing. So I would have overthunk it. And I would have been like, well, if he's not telling me, then that must mean I failed and killed everyone. Because if I succeeded, he would have just told me, because there's no reason for him not to tell me, because it wouldn't change anything. But thankfully Picard's not me. And he didn't overthink it like that. And of course, the real answer is that this guy isn't even from the future, he's from the past, which is why he didn't know. But yeah. So, the thing about Beverly, I don't know, I watched this review where they said that he was being, that he was flirting with her heart out when she wasn't reciprocating. She clearly didn't feel the same way. But that's not the vibe I got. I got that she was totally into him at first. Like, she was always very excited. She was like, oh, come here, Professor. And she was smiling and sort of like getting close to him. Now, it was very clear that she didn't actually want to do anything with him. But she was being kind of flirtatious, I believe, throughout most. So I could at least I can understand why Rasmussen would think maybe there was something going on between the two of them. But he was being really pushy with her in that scene in the sickbay. The fact that he put up his arm and she had to duck under him and he got like way too close to her. So yeah, he was being a bit creepy there, for sure. But I think in earlier scenes there was a little something going on between the two of them. She just didn't want to, finish the deal, as they say. Because as she said, I could be your great grandmother, which turns out that is the other way around, that he could be her great grandfather. But anyway, but he should have said, you know what he should have said, which would have been a perfect pickup line? He should have been like, well, maybe you are my great-great-grandmother, and maybe I'm your great-great-grand, I'm my own great-great-grandfather, and in order for me to even exist, that means we that would have been stupid, but it's like Futurama. Anyway, well, I think there's other things that did that. Like Bashir made that joke in Trials and Tribulations about that. Maybe I am destined to become my own great-grandfather. That was pretty funny. I love how they just play that off for a joke. But anyway, that's a different episode. So here's a problem with canon. Well, I should say it was retconned maybe later, or maybe it wasn't. I think so. Rasputin is actually from the 22nd century, and he's talking a lot about the 22nd century, like compare 24th century technology to 22nd century. So you got to think that, that's why, he's doing that so he could find out the difference and what he needs to steal or whatever. But one of the things that Riker said was they didn't have the warp coil in the 22nd century, so they didn't have warp drive, and they couldn't go faster than light. Beverly Crusher said they didn't have force fields, so they still had to use surgical masks and gloves. But the thing is, 22nd century is when Enterprise takes place. Now, granted, the warp drive wasn't that commonplace, but Enterprise takes place in 2150. Was it? Let me look at the date. 2151 through 2155. So, that's halfway through the century. So you think warp drive is actually probably a little bit more common towards the end of the century, and they didn't specify when in the 22nd century they were talking about. They were just talking about the 22nd century in general. And besides, First Contact was apparently 2063. So warp drive had in fact existed since the 21st century. And so Riker's statement that they didn't have the warp coil, they didn't have warp drive, does not fit into canon at all. And the fact that there's this shady con man from the 22nd century would seem to imply that this was before Earth sort of became a paradise and didn't really have this, the scruples and lofty ideas that the Federation now has, which in Enterprise they did. But, that timeline is really fucked up anyway, to be fair. Like, what this timeline is a bit more realistic. But, yeah, and how could you say they didn't have warp drive in the 22nd century when the original series takes place in the 23rd century? Yeah, the whole Star Trek timeline is a bit of a mess. Like, for example, First Contact was in 2063. That's 39 years from now. So during that time, we're supposed to have a Third World War, and there's supposed to be they were supposed to invent warp drive, and within the next 39 years, mark your calendar. Yeah, that's really not gonna fucking happen. But I said this all along about Star Trek's time frame, is that Gene Roddenberry's timetable, and I don't remember when exactly they pinned down it was the 23rd century, because it was Star Trek 2. I think I read somewhere it was officially, like, they thought about this and thought that might be the case, but they didn't make it canon until Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, because it's a title card that said in the 23rd century. And sorry, but they pitched it way too early. I think there were other episodes of the original series that implied that it was actually much later, which actually would make sense. I gotta be honest, with the level of technology that they have in Star Trek, it should be set at least 1,000 years in the future. Like The Expanse, which they don't have faster than light drive because they know that it wouldn't exist, and they haven't really left the solar system at the start of the show, and they just colonized some moons and planets and asteroids in our own solar system, and that's set in the 23rd century. And so that, I think, is actually a lot more realistic expectations. Even that is probably too much, but it's a hell of a lot more realistic than fucking Star Trek. That is for damn sure. So yeah, the time frame is always way off anyway. Like, that's why they said that Khan started this eugenics wars in 1994, which is now 30 years ago. But whatever. Anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I want to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neil Howells. Thank you so very, very much for all your very strong and appreciated support. I would also like to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Medijester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Michelasio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, in the episode Devil's Due, Picard was on the con straight away. However, in this episode, he seems to be lacking any intelligence at all. At least Troy and Riker were suspicious that this character was in fact not Jim Carrey. See, it's Jim Carrey. At least Mark can't say I blame Rick Berman for Troy not using her superpowers, right? He can say it for Picard for being an absolute idiot. In fact, Deanna was the best thing in this episode. Well, Rick Berman did write this episode. I'm just saying. Picard is begging him for his help when they are in the ready room, and suddenly when they are on the bridge and he knows everything, either the writers of this episode forget the scene before this, or Mark is right, I blame Rick Berman, as it makes no sense. I actually prefer that they were all clueless and Worf should have been the one who figured this out, but we don't get that. So, this is what happened. It was Riker and Troy, as they were both suspicious of this fake Jim Carrey. So, my rating is 5. The next few episodes, do I have to write comment? This is beginning to sound like homework. At least Conundrum and Power Play are coming up soon, but I guess they will be on Patreon out of 10. P.S. Have you reviewed Ethics? I have a bone to pick with someone. I know Barclay was hit by a probe, however, they could have used anyone else to be a genius. If Hollow Pursuits never happened, all the other episodes Barclay appeared in would be okay. The scene with Troy and Ten Ford only happened to wrap up the episode and was there for humor only, like the ending of a TOS. Do people realize you can be friends with a woman or vice versa, and that is it? But alright, so referring to the ending of the Nth Degree, where I talked about how it was kind of unprofessional of her, at least other people were saying it was unprofessional of Troy to, really come on to Barclay like that. But I think this goes beyond, like, platonic friendships, because she specifically said we're going on a date, and she specifically, like, grabbed his arm and hooked it around the way that you do when you're taking someone on a date. She said we're going on a date, specifically after he asked her on a date and hit on her hard out. So I'm gonna say that's not how platonic friends, especially those that are the counselor and the patient, should be behaving towards their patients. Just saying. Anyway, Have I reviewed Ethics? I have not. So you're in luck with that one. You can do a comment for that. But you know what? You don't have to do a comment for every episode. You know, if it's starting to come off as homework, then by all means, only write comments for the episodes you really have something to say about. No, I'm not twisting your arm. I'm just giving you the opportunity to do it if you want to. But with Conundrum is going to be on Patreon, yes, because I already did a review for that, so you won't have an opportunity to do a comment for that. But Power Play isn't, because I haven't done a review for Power Play. So again, if you so desire, you will be able to do a review for that one. But yeah, I can see what you're saying, because we're about to get into a bunch of really boring, mediocre to bad episodes, so I can see why you would be dreading the what's coming next. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, so as far as I'm concerned, this episode is most infamous for Troy's empathic abilities to not sense really anything. It's interesting as we are rewatching or recalling these, that by the time we got to this episode, it seemed the writers gave up, throwing in some lame line as to what she is sensing when she absolutely would be missing the mark, whether it be Tasha's sister, Dr. Marr, well beyond her obvious display of prejudice against Data, and even Admiral Satie. Troy would and should be reading the humans better than other species, but at this point, the writers realized Troy was a plot buster. I don't know, just have Rasputin have one of those actually futuristic technology pieces the original time traveler had that could keep his mind from being read, and that would have resolved things nicely, I'd argue. Yes, it may be a MacGuffin, but otherwise it seems like Troy's abilities are absolutely useless when it comes to her role as ship's counselor to be a diplomat. Okay, Troy rant done. Hey, could have been worse if Troy was the one Rasputin was wooing and not Crusher. One area of what would have been in the story is that the role was originally planned to be Robin Williams. He would have most certainly been fantastic in this role, given that Max Headroom, i.e. Matt Fuhr, did the role fine. Still, I can only imagine how much better Williams' timing would have been, especially in response to one of Picard's best speeches. Of course, it's amazing that this flim-flam artist appeared to be more successful than Ardria. In this case, only Data finally was onto him clearly. I actually would have liked some short trek of the day to tell some story of Rasputin and Tom Paris in New Zealand prison, granted after he was rightfully caught, and maybe some story what happened to the original time traveler in Enterprise. Maybe Daniels pulled another whoopsie, LOL. Once again, and this is quite common in TNG, an episode relies so much on the guest star, and while no, he was not Robin Williams, Fuhr did fine enough. But given that, I'll have to give a slight ding, as the best and the brightest of Starfleet seem to be as dense about Rasputin as they were about Data and Lore back in the first season. The acting, etc. would have been an 8, and I almost thought of giving it a 6, but finally I'll settle for a 7. Mind-blocking devices from the future that should have been in Rasputin's possession to keep Troy from immediately calling him out of 10. So, alright, so let's get into this Troy thing. Well, first let's talk about how, and this is a common sentiment I've heard a lot of people say about this episode, that the crew is acting dumb by not being on to him earlier. And I disagree with that. honestly, I think, first of all, when Picard gave his amazing speech, and this touches on what Stephen Kennedy said as well, but when Picard gave his amazing speech, I think he was aware that Rasputin was not all who he claimed to be, and I think that's part of the reason why he was pushing him. And I think when Rasputin said, I'm sorry I can't help you, that confirmed to Picard, well, maybe this fucker isn't from the future after all. But that's all headcanon, but I think that's backed up by some of the evidence in the show, because they go straight from that ready room scene to the bridge, they enact the plan, and once they enact the plan and Rasputin leaves the bridge, he goes to Riker and signals him like, okay, now let's do it, let's get this son of a bitch. So I think it's very clear that he was already knew that something was up with him even during the ready room speech. So I think that was Picard testing him, but that is just my headcanon. Anyway, but I think it makes sense. But even barring that, like, say at the start of the episode they weren't that suspicious of him except for Troy and Riker, particularly Troy. I would say Worf was more suspicious than Riker. But anyway, I get it. Like, he has this futuristic time ship, and they scanned it, and it's obviously got a temporal signature, and he has this futuristic technology. I get that they would take him at his word to begin with. But I think the larger point is that he's actually a terrible con artist, because everything he does is like very annoying. He's like purposely trying to antagonize them. Actual con artists will try to be friendly with you and make you your friend and make you feel at ease so you don't realize you're being conned, where he was a bit too obvious about it by being all annoying and fly on the wall and like sitting in Riker's chair and shit like that. And I was thinking, yeah, no, if he's actually a con artist, it seems like he wouldn't be doing shit like that. Just saying, that would be my complaint. But as for Troy, and I think there's another comment that touches on Troy, but I'll just get this out of the way now. A lot of people point out that this is one of the worst episodes for her superpower. Her empathic power is failing, and I very strongly disagree with that. I think Norman brings up Tasha's sister, so the Ashara Yar episode, what's it called, Legacy? I think that was worse. And Dr. Mara and Silicon Avatar, I think that was also worse. Because here's the thing. I think that, and someone, I think it was Steven said, they should have thrown in a line to address this. But they did. So, or maybe it was Norman talking about the weird device thingy, which that would have been a neater way to completely solve it. But I think the episode did try to address this, because they had Troy outright say, when they first met him, he's hiding something. But Crusher and the others was like, well, of course he's hiding something. He's from the future. He can't tell us everything, so that's what he's hiding. And Troy is like very unconvinced. She's like, nah, I don't think so. So her empathic powers are working, because she's able to sense that he's hiding something. And mind you, she's not, and this is something I had to keep reminding people, she is not a full telepath. She cannot read minds. She can only sense emotions. And I think that for the most part, those powers are actually pretty well consistent. And then she really doesn't trust him. And when he talks to her in sickbay and is like, oh, Picard's empath won't trust you. And she's like, Picard's empath? Really? And then he goes, we're birds of a feather. We're colleagues. And then she's like, you're right. I don't trust you. Now, could they have done a better job with her empathic powers? Sure. Like, for example, I think she should have been the one, not Worf, and not Data. She should have been the one to caught on to him. She should have been the one to catch him. She should have been the one that, when someone pointed out, some things might be missing, she should have been like, it's definitely fucking him. He's up to something. And then she could figure out that something was wrong. So they could have done more with that. And also, she, in some cases, could outright sense deception and could tell the difference between simply hiding something or purposely trying to deceive someone. So I think that is definitely the biggest flaw as far as Troy goes. That she should have been able to sense outright that he was trying to deceive them rather than simply hiding something. But she shouldn't have, like, if people expect her to tell that he's from the 22nd century, her powers are not that good. They've never been shown to be that good. She can only sense emotion. So I think at best case scenario, she would have been able to sense deception from him, which she has done in the past. So I will ding the episode for that. But I think this actually isn't one of the worst cases. I think there are much worse cases, because at least they addressed the fact that she knew he was hiding something, and that she didn't like him and was super suspicious of him. So I think at least they were doing something about it. I think the Ashara Yar example is actually much worse, because in that episode they tried to address it by her saying, oh, she obviously has divided loyalties. And so the episode's trying to tell you that, oh, she does have divided loyalties. She actually does want to go to the Enterprise partly. But her loyalties are clearly not that divided when she is purposely deceiving them, talks to that 80s hairband guy and is like it's working, and then at the end she pulls a phaser and Data and tries to freaking kill him. I think that's more than just divided loyalties, and I think Troy should have fucking sensed goddamn deception from her. So I actually think that situation's much worse. Dr. Marr, she could sense it. Obviously, she was pissed off, and like anyone, you didn't need an empath to know that she fucking hated the crystalline entity and wanted to kill it. But Troy took a little bit too long to catch on to the fact that no, she's actually trying to kill it. So yeah, both those cases I think are actually worse than this one. And there's probably other episodes further back I'm not remembering where her powers actually failed a lot more significant than this episode. So I do think this is a case of her powers not being done perfectly, but it's not that bad in my opinion. She should have sensed deception instead of hiding something, but that's actually not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. Anyway, we got another comment from Stephen Kennedy that says, in defense of Deanna Troi, Troy's telepathic abilities, or I like to call it superpower, in some episodes she can sense a lot more than other episodes they don't even use her. She only sensed something was off with Rasputin, so instead of being removed from the episode, Troy was kept in because she didn't trust him. I know Mark will hate this next part, but I think Rick Berman understands Troy's character because Gene Roddenberry told him a little secret that I think most people forget. Drum roll, please. Deanna's Troi is only half Betazoid, so her superpower wouldn't be as good as Loxana Troi. This is the reason Troi isn't fully Betazoid, so the episode can happen. Where did I hear that before? Yeah, so that's what I mentioned. To be fair, I don't think everyone forgets that she's half Betazoid, but I think sometimes they do expect more from her empathic abilities than what has been established. But as for Rick Berman understanding her character, yeah, I'm going to have to agree to disagree with you on that one. Fuck Rick Berman. Where's my pillow? Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, a totally unremarkable episode. It feels like the script didn't have enough story to fill the runtime. I wonder what happened to the time ship after it returned to the 22nd century. It would still be a great risk to the integrity of the timeline. Interesting was the discussion about the existence of free will. Is it an illusion, or do we have it? Which would mean that the timeline would be altered all the time whenever someone is making a alternative choice. Although maybe 99% of the choices wouldn't have any greater consequences, it is really an average episode, so my rating is a 5 out of 10. I think you're giving this episode too much credit, even though you gave it a 5 out of 10, for having a discussion about free will. I mean, they kind of touch on it with Picard going, living is making choices, but really, they only skim the topic. They don't really get into the, and it's just that one scene that, like, they don't really get into that in this episode. Now, as a good question about the time ship, here, my headcanon on this is one of two things happen. Either one, Rasputin didn't actually kill the time traveler from the 26th century. He just tied him up and put a gag, like a cartoon or whatever, on him. And so by the time the time ship came back, the time traveler had freed himself, and he was waiting for it, and as soon as it appeared, he got in and took it back to the 26th century. So that's headcanon number one. Headcanon number two is that it remained there, like cloaked or whatever, undiscovered, and because apparently when the scientist first came, he made contact with a local, which is how he learned about him. But I think otherwise, the ship would, with no one there to actually talk to anyone, the ship would just sit there and be cloaked, and then eventually it was set on a timer, so it would just automatically go back to the 26th century. Of course, I'm completely making all this up because there's nothing, but not, the episode doesn't tell you one way or another. But those are my two headcanons on why it didn't totally fuck up the timeline. So either one of those could work, in my opinion. But it's funny because speaking of that scientist from the 26th century, when I did a top 10 most reckless examples of time travel in Star Trek, where I did shit like the Picard season 2, where they were just killing a whole bunch of people in the past with no regard of how that would fuck up the timeline. Maybe those people should have given birth after that point, and all these people will never be born because of what they did. Or fucking Kira traveling in the past to kill her own mother. And I mentioned this episode, but I wasn't talking about Rasmussen. I was talking about the scientist himself from the 26th century, who we didn't actually see on screen. But still, I called him a reckless time traveler because he went back to the fucking 22nd century and let himself be captured. He was obviously careless. And, so he was reckless. But anyway, next comment is from Greg Marley, who says, this is an interesting, memorable episode. It's got an intriguing premise, and all the main crew get a good scene, which we forget doesn't always happen. In rewatching, I've noticed some episodes here and there across the series where Deanna and Geordi, for instance, just don't appear at all, or ones where, say, Crusher or Data are seen for like 20 seconds, and then a single line, or maybe not even that. But everyone here has an enjoyable or revealing interaction with the quirky, clearly not entirely trustworthy, but still somehow also kind of likable adventurer, conveniently armed with plausible and tantalizing hints of secret knowledge. The guest star is perfect in this role. He sells it totally, and I'd go so far as to say he might rank in the top 20 best TNG guest stars appearing in a single episode, in the sense that an episode just wouldn't have worked without the actor. Picard in particular has a great scene in his ready room where he lays on the line and asks for a little guidance with some powerful lines or at least memorable delivery. So to me, compared to some of the frankly a little dull and mediocre episodes populating season 5, I can't imagine not enjoying this as a bright moment. I would buy a top 20 guest stars for TNG, not top 20 for the entire franchise. Like, I think I did a top 10 for the entire franchise. I don't know if I even considered Matt Fuhrer for it. But if you're doing top 20 and not for the entire franchise, but just TNG, yeah, no, I would say that's fair. I would definitely put him in, and I agree that the episode wouldn't work without a key actor like Matt Fuhr who could totally pull this off. That being said, Robin Williams would have been much, much better. But anyway, and final comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, "Geez, Max Headroom, tone it down a bit. This episode is tiresome, and Max Headroom is a rather creepy fella. Troy is useless, no surprise. It's a shame this episode doesn't live up to its promising title. I don't understand how Rasmussen even knows who the Enterprise crew is. The effects are just plain silly, particularly when the cold from the planet shoots back and surrounds the Enterprise. 4 unconscious time travelers from New Jersey out of 10. I do have to reiterate the line where Data says, I believe your hand will open the door whether you're conscious or not. It's such a badass line. That's like a really good Data line. It's just such an awesome moment. Anyway, yeah, I didn't think about the whole effects with the atmosphere shooting into the Enterprise. Yeah, it wasn't the best, to be sure. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so very much for your comments. So my rating for A Matter of Time out of 10 is going to be a 6. Good. I'll give this episode the benefit of the doubt and give it a positive rating because I do think there's some good lines in it. I love Picard's speeches. I think Matt Fuhr is great in the role. Not as good as Robin Williams would have been, but still, he's definitely better than your average guest star actor would have been. So he definitely elevates the episode. And you have those good lines, such as the line where Data is like, you know, your hand will open the door whether you're conscious or not. That was classic. And then the Worf bitching about the questionnaires. I hate questionnaires. That shit was funny. And yeah, so you had your good moments. And it was the moral dilemma about, do we let thousands die or do we try to save millions, but they all could die if we did. So that was kind of interesting, but they didn't really do much with it. And as I said, the B plot was just throwaway nonsense that you actually don't really give a fuck about. And it was just there to take up space. And yeah, the Rasmussen plot was not perfect. There were flaws with it. And overall, this episode was kind of, as I said, it was kind of just a throwaway episode. It doesn't really stick in the mind. It's not really that memorable. It's one of the lesser uses of time travel. You think about all the great time travel episodes, this episode never comes to mind because it's not particularly remarkable one way or the other. In fact, I often forget about it when I'm trying to remember all the time travel episodes because it's just not that memorable and not that good. It's just kind of, yeah, Matt Fuhr's going around acting all annoying, basically. But as I said, it's decent enough to get a positive rating for, but definitely not any higher than a 6. So yeah, that's my rating, 6 out of 10. Anyway, that is it for my review of A Matter of Time. So, I'll see what's coming up next on my channel. Saturday, I'll be over on Patreon for Revisited, this time revisiting my review for Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. And then on Sunday, hey, guess what? House of the Dragon starts. So I'll be doing my review either Sunday night or Monday morning. I'll try to make these reviews short. We'll see how successful I am at doing that. But yeah, so I'll do a review for House of the Dragon. And then on Tuesday, another Star Trek review. I review Back to TNG with New Ground. Oh boy. Anyway, that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out for that and many more Star Trek videos and many more videos of many other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.